I'm Madison, 28 years old, and I just got kicked out of my family's Thanksgiving dinner. Standing here on their doorstep with my overnight bag, listening to laughter echoing from inside the house I grew up in, I can still hear my father's words ringing in my ears, "Go live in the streets if you can't get your life together." What they don't know, what they could never imagine in their wildest dreams, is that the daughter they just disowned controls a tech empire worth hundreds of millions and personally earns $25 million every single year. Before I dive into this wild story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, hit that like button because this one's for you. And definitely subscribe because you won't believe how this whole situation unfolds. Trust me, this Thanksgiving dinner revelation is just the beginning of something much bigger. 3 hours earlier, I had walked through that same front door carrying a simple pumpkin pie from the grocery store, dressed in jeans and a plain sweater. I deliberately kept my appearance low-key because I'd learned years ago that any sign of success would trigger uncomfortable questions from my family. My parents Robert and Linda were bustling around the kitchen while my younger siblings Trevor and Natasha lounged on the couch, already making snide comments about my arrival. "Look who finally decided to show up," Trevor called out without even looking away from the football game. "Did you remember to bring your imaginary boyfriend again this year?" Natasha giggled at his comment, adding her own poison to the mix. "I'm surprised you could afford gas money to drive here." "Oh wait, you probably took the bus." Their comments stung, but I'd grown accustomed to this treatment over the years. What I wasn't prepared for was how much worse it would get as the evening progressed. During dinner, the attacks became more systematic and cruel. My mother Linda made a point of mentioning how both Trevor and Natasha had real jobs while gesturing dismissively in my direction. Trevor just got promoted to assistant manager at the car dealership, and Natasha is doing so well in her marketing position, she announced proudly. Then came the inevitable comparison that I dreaded every time I visited home. Meanwhile, Madison is still playing around on her computer all day, pretending she's running some kind of business. The word pretending hit me like a physical blow. If they only knew that my pretend business had generated over $200 million in revenue last year alone, they might have chosen their words more carefully. But I sat there silently, cutting my turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, trying to swallow both the food and my growing resentment. My father Robert joined the conversation with his own brand of disappointment. "At your age, Madison, you should have figured out by now that daydreaming doesn't pay the bills. Your siblings understand the value of hard work and steady income." After dinner, while everyone else relaxed in the living room, I found myself alone in the kitchen washing dishes for 8 people. This had become my assigned role over the years, the family member who cleaned up after everyone else because I supposedly contributed nothing else of value. As I scrubbed plates and listened to my family laughing in the next room, I wondered how they would react if they knew that my personal assistant usually handled tasks like this, or that I owned a penthouse where someone else did all the housework. The final humiliation came when Linda cornered me in the kitchen with an ultimatum that would change everything between us forever. "Madison, your father and I have been talking, and we've decided that this situation can't continue indefinitely. You're 28 years old, and you're still acting like a teenager with these fantasy stories about being an entrepreneur." She paused dramatically, clearly enjoying the power she felt she held over me. "We're giving you 30 days to find a real job with a real paycheck, or we don't want you coming back to this house. We're tired of enabling your delusions." Trevor appeared in the doorway at that moment, having obviously been listening to our conversation. His next words would become the first in a series of betrayals that would ultimately destroy any remaining relationship I had with my family. "I've been telling people at work that my sister is unemployed and living off friends because I'm embarrassed to admit the truth. The truth is even worse than that because you're not just unemployed, you're completely detached from reality." He looked directly at me with genuine disdain. "Mom's right. Either get a job at McDonald's or Walmart like a normal person, or stop pretending to be part of this family." The seeds of this Thanksgiving disaster had been planted 5 years earlier when I made the decision that would define both my future success and my family's rejection of me. At 23, I was halfway through an MBA program that my parents had proudly funded, believing it would lead to a respectable corporate career. Instead, I shocked them by dropping out to start my own technology company with $50,000 I'd saved from part-time jobs and student loans. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Linda cried for days, telling anyone who would listen that I had thrown away my future for a foolish fantasy. Robert stopped speaking to me entirely for 3 months, and when he finally broke his silence, it was only to lecture me about responsibility and realistic expectations. Successful businesses are built by people with experience and connections, not by college dropouts working out of their garage, he told me repeatedly. You're going to fail, and when you do, don't expect us to bail you out. For the first 2 years of building my company, I lived exactly as they predicted I would. My garage became my office, my bedroom, and sometimes my dining room when I was too exhausted to walk to the kitchen. I survived on ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever free food I could find at networking events. During those early months, there were countless nights when I questioned my decision and wondered if my parents had been right about my unrealistic expectations. The worst part wasn't the financial struggle or even the isolation of working alone for 16 hours a day. The worst part was watching my family celebrate my failure with barely concealed satisfaction. Every time I visited home during those difficult early years, I could see the relief in their faces when they confirmed that I was still struggling. Trevor particularly enjoyed these visits, often making jokes about my failed experiment in front of extended family members during holidays and birthday parties. But the real betrayal came during my second year when I desperately needed capital to keep my company alive. I had developed a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform for business automation, but I needed $50,000 to file patents and hire my first employee. Despite my pride, I approached Trevor privately, explaining that I could pay him back with interest within 6 months. He agreed to lend me the money, and I was overwhelmed with gratitude that someone in my family finally believed in me enough to take a chance. 6 months later, when I tried to repay him with the promised interest, Trevor laughed in my face and refused to accept the money. You can't pay me back with imaginary profits from your pretend company, he said mockingly. That money was a gift, not a loan, because I knew you'd never be able to pay it back anyway. When I showed him bank statements proving that my company was generating real revenue, he dismissed them as fabrications. Anyone can create fake documents on a computer, Madison. I'm not stupid enough to fall for this fantasy you've created. What made this betrayal even more painful was that Trevor immediately went to our parents with his version of events, painting me as delusional and dishonest. Linda and Robert believed his story without question, adding their own interpretation that I was experiencing some kind of psychological break from reality. We're worried about Madison's mental health, Linda confided to relatives and family friends. She's become so invested in these business fantasies that she's lost touch with what's real and what's not. The ultimate humiliation came when Linda decided I was too embarrassing to include in Trevor's wedding planning. We think it would be better if you didn't come to the engagement party or the bachelor party events, she explained with false concern. You know how you get when people ask about your job situation, and we don't want any drama or awkward conversations at Trevor's special events. The message was clear, I was no longer considered a legitimate member of the family worth including in important celebrations. During this period, I came closer than ever to giving up on my entrepreneurial dreams and returning to the conventional path my family demanded. The constant criticism and social isolation were taking a psychological toll that I hadn't anticipated when I started this journey. There were nights when I seriously considered shutting down my company, finding a corporate job, and begging for forgiveness and acceptance from my family. The only thing that stopped me was a stubborn refusal to let their lack of vision define my future. 3 years ago, everything changed when Technova Solutions landed its first major contract with a Fortune 500 company for $2 million. My artificial intelligence platform had caught the attention of a retail giant looking to automate their supply chain management, and suddenly I found myself negotiating deals that dwarfed anything I had dreamed possible during those garage startup days. But instead of celebrating this breakthrough with my family, I found myself in the strange position of hiding my success to avoid their disbelief and potential demands for money. The only person who knew the full scope of my achievements was Alexander Chen, a successful entrepreneur who had become my mentor and lead investor. Alexander understood family dynamics from his own difficult relationship with parents who had never supported his business ventures. Sometimes the people closest to us are the least capable of seeing our potential, he told me during one of our regular coffee meetings. Don't let their inability to recognize your worth diminish what you've accomplished. But even as my bank account grew and my company gained recognition in tech industry publications, I was dealing with new attacks from my family that seemed to escalate in proportion to my hidden success. Natasha had somehow gained access to my social security number and personal information, which she used to apply for credit cards and personal loans that she never intended to repay. When the bills and collection notices started arriving at my apartment, I discovered that my credit score had been destroyed by someone using my identity for fraudulent purchases. When I confronted Natasha about the identity theft, she broke down crying and claimed it was a mistake, that she had only meant to borrow a small amount of money during a financial emergency. Linda immediately came to her defense, insisting that I was overreacting to what she called a family member asking for help in a crisis. Instead of supporting my decision to file a police report, my mother convinced me that involving law enforcement would destroy Natasha's future employment prospects. She made a mistake, but she's family, Linda argued. You can't seriously be considering putting your own sister in jail over money. The psychological impact of hiding my success while being treated like a failure was more damaging than I had anticipated. I would spend my days in boardroom meetings with Fortune 500 executives, making decisions that affected millions of dollars in revenue, then drive home to my family treating me like an unemployed burden on society. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, especially during family gatherings where I had to listen to lectures about responsibility and work ethic from people who had no idea what I actually did for a living. Robert's treatment became particularly cruel during this period. He started telling neighbors and family friends that I was suffering from mental health issues that caused me to fabricate stories about business success. Madison has always been a creative child, but now she's crossed the line into delusional thinking, he would explain to anyone who would listen. We're trying to get her professional help, but she refuses to admit that these business stories are fantasies. The cruelest cut came when I missed my grandmother's funeral because my family had changed their contact information without telling me. I only learned about her death 3 days after the service when a concerned cousin reached out through social media to ask why I hadn't attended. When I called my parents demanding an explanation, Linda claimed they had tried to reach me but that my phone number must have been disconnected because they couldn't get through. The truth was that they had deliberately excluded me from this final goodbye because they were ashamed of my presence at family events. During this period of secret success and family rejection, I found myself living a double life that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. My company was featured in Forbes magazine as one of the fastest-growing tech startups in the country, but I had to use a pseudonym and avoid any photographs that might be recognized by my family. I owned a penthouse apartment worth $5 million, but I told my family I was renting a small studio apartment from a friend who felt sorry for my unemployment situation. The loneliness was perhaps the most unexpected consequence of my success. I had achieved financial goals beyond my wildest dreams, but I had no family to share these achievements with, no one to call when I landed a major contract or when my company reached another milestone. Alexander and my small team of employees had become my chosen family, but I still grieved for the biological family that had rejected me before they even knew who I had become. Every night, I would sit in my luxurious home office, looking out at city lights that represented opportunities and success, while feeling emptier than I had during those early garage days when I was struggling to survive. Success without family acceptance felt hollow in ways I hadn't anticipated, but I was determined to continue building my empire even if I had to do it completely alone. 1 year ago, when Technova Solutions reached a valuation of $100 million, my brother Trevor made a decision that would transform our family conflict from passive rejection into active warfare. He started his own technology consulting company, which wouldn't have bothered me except that he began using my personal information and family connections to approach my existing clients and potential customers. Trevor had somehow obtained confidential details about my business relationships, pricing strategies, and upcoming product launches. The discovery of his industrial espionage came when one of my long-term clients forwarded me an email they had received from Trevor's company. In the message, he claimed to be my business partner who had been pushed out of Technova Solutions due to personality conflicts, and he offered to provide the same services at significantly reduced prices. The email included proprietary information about our artificial intelligence algorithms that could have only come from someone with access to my private business documents. The betrayal cut deeper when I realized that my cousin Laura, who had been one of the few family members to maintain a friendly relationship with me over the years, had been feeding information to Trevor about my business activities. Laura worked as an administrative assistant at a law firm where she had access to business filing databases, and she had been tracking my company's growth and financial information to pass along to my brother. When I confronted her about this violation of trust, she didn't even try to deny it. Trevor convinced me that you were involved in something illegal because no one makes that kind of money that quickly without cutting corners, Laura explained when I cornered her at a family birthday party. We thought we were protecting the family from being associated with whatever scheme you were running. Trevor said you might even be involved with money laundering or tax evasion, and that someone needed to investigate before the whole family got in trouble. The situation escalated when Trevor filed a frivolous lawsuit claiming that I had stolen his business ideas and that Technova Solutions was rightfully half his property. The legal documents were filled with fabricated stories about our supposed business partnership and financial agreements that had never existed. My attorney Sarah Martinez was astounded by the blatant lies and fabricated evidence, but she warned me that fighting the lawsuit would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and months of litigation. Even though his claims are obviously false, he's betting that you'll settle out of court to avoid the expense and publicity, Sarah explained during our strategy meeting. This is a common tactic used by people who want to extort money from successful individuals. The legal system unfortunately allows these kinds of nuisance lawsuits to proceed even when they have no merit. The worst part was that Trevor had clearly consulted with experienced attorneys who helped him craft claims that would be expensive to disprove even though they were completely fabricated. During this same period, Linda escalated her own attacks by hiring a private investigator to expose what she believed were my fraudulent business activities. She had become convinced that I was running some kind of elaborate scam and that my apparent success was built on illegal activities. The investigator she hired was instructed to find evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, or any other criminal activity that would explain my rapid rise to wealth. What Linda didn't realize was that my business activities were completely legitimate and that her private investigator would find nothing but evidence of my genuine success. When the investigator's report came back clean, confirming that Technova Solutions was exactly what I claimed it to be, Linda refused to accept the findings. Instead, she convinced herself that I had somehow fooled the investigator or that I was paying him to file a false report. Madison has always been manipulative, she told anyone who would listen. Now she's using her computer skills to fool people into thinking she's successful. My response to these attacks was calculated and strategic rather than emotional. I had learned from Alexander that successful entrepreneurs must be prepared to defend themselves against all kinds of threats, including those from family members who might try to exploit their success. I quietly began documenting every interaction with my family members, recording phone calls and saving text messages that demonstrated their hostile intentions toward my business. More importantly, I started investigating Trevor's own financial activities and discovered that he had been evading taxes on income from various side businesses for several years. I also found evidence that he had been inflating his expense reports at the car dealership where he worked, essentially stealing money from his employer through fraudulent reimbursement claims. Rather than expose this information immediately, I decided to hold it as leverage for future negotiations. The psychological toll of this warfare was exhausting, but it also strengthened my resolve to succeed despite my family's attempts to sabotage me. I realized that their attacks weren't really about concern for my welfare or confusion about my activities, but about their own feelings of inadequacy and jealousy. They needed me to fail in order to feel better about their own limited achievements, and my success threatened their self-image in ways they couldn't acknowledge or process healthily. During those difficult months, I found myself working even harder and achieving even greater success, partly out of spite and partly out of determination to prove that their negativity couldn't destroy what I had built. Every new client, every successful project, every industry recognition felt like a victory not just for my company but against the family members who had tried so hard to bring me down. 6 months ago, Technova Solutions went public through an initial public offering that valued the company at $500 million, making my personal stake worth over $200 million on paper. The IPO was covered by major financial publications, and I was invited to speak at technology conferences around the world. However, I continued to maintain my anonymity in public appearances, using my middle name Rebecca instead of Madison to avoid recognition by my family members who might be monitoring business news. The success of the IPO should have been the crowning achievement of my entrepreneurial journey, but instead it marked the beginning of the most vicious attacks my family had ever launched against me. Trevor, Natasha, and Laura had apparently formed an alliance dedicated to destroying my reputation and potentially my business through a coordinated campaign of lies and character assassination that would have impressed professional political operatives with its sophistication and cruelty. Their strategy began with creating fake social media profiles that claimed to expose the truth about my business practices and personal character. These accounts posted detailed stories about supposed romantic relationships I had never had, financial improprieties that had never occurred, and business partnerships that existed only in their imagination. The most damaging posts claimed that I had achieved my success through inappropriate relationships with married investors and that Technova Solutions was essentially a front for money laundering operations. The fake social media campaign was coordinated with anonymous tips to business journalists and regulatory agencies, claiming that my company was engaged in fraudulent activities that warranted investigation. While these tips never led to any actual investigations because there was no evidence to support the claims, they created enough noise and concern that some potential clients and business partners began asking uncomfortable questions about my background and business practices. Linda's role in this conspiracy was perhaps the most psychologically devastating because she positioned herself as the concerned mother trying to protect the community from her dangerous daughter. She would break down crying in conversations with neighbors, family friends, and even strangers at the grocery store, explaining how heartbroken she was to have a daughter who had chosen a life of crime and deception. "I don't know where we went wrong with Madison," she would sob dramatically. "We raised her to be honest and hardworking, but she's chosen this path of lying and cheating to get ahead." The emotional manipulation was so effective that people who had known me since childhood began looking at me with suspicion and concern. Former teachers, family friends, and neighbors who had watched me grow up started avoiding me in public or making pointed comments about the importance of honesty and integrity whenever they saw me. The social isolation was almost unbearable, especially since I couldn't defend myself without revealing information about my business that I wasn't ready to share publicly. Fighting back against this campaign required hiring a crisis management firm that specialized in reputation defense, and the process cost me over $2 million in legal fees, private investigators, and public relations consultants. Sarah Martinez coordinated with a team of specialists to trace the source of the false information, document the coordinated nature of the attacks, and prepare cease and desist orders for the worst offenders. The investigation revealed the extent of my family's conspiracy and provided evidence that could be used in both civil and criminal proceedings. But the most shocking discovery came when our investigation revealed that Robert and Linda had been consulting with an attorney about having me declared mentally incompetent so they could gain legal control over what they believed were my ill-gotten assets. They had apparently convinced themselves that my success was evidence of criminal activity or mental illness, and they wanted to have me committed to a psychiatric facility where they could take over my financial affairs as my legal guardians. The irony was breathtaking. The same people who had spent years telling me I was a failure and would never amount to anything were now so convinced of my success that they wanted to steal it from me. They had gone from believing I had no money to believing I had so much money that it must be illegal, and their solution was to have me declared insane so they could control my wealth themselves. During this period, I found myself working from my penthouse office late into the night, not because I needed to, but because the isolation and betrayal had left me unable to sleep or relax. The city lights below represented a world of opportunity and success, but I felt more alone than ever despite being surrounded by employees, advisors, and business partners who respected and admired my achievements. The family that should have been celebrating my success was instead actively working to destroy everything I had built. Alexander became not just my mentor but my therapist during this dark period, helping me process the psychological impact of being systematically attacked by the people who should have loved and supported me unconditionally. The hardest lesson successful people have to learn is that not everyone will celebrate your achievements, he told me during one of our weekly meetings. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who will try hardest to tear you down. 3 months ago, my world shifted dramatically when I discovered that my family had been planning what they called an intervention to address my supposed psychological problems and business improprieties. Through my private investigator, I learned that Robert had been meeting with attorneys and mental health professionals to explore options for having me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. The plan was to gather the family together under the pretense of a reconciliation dinner, then present me with an ultimatum to either voluntarily seek treatment or face legal proceedings to declare me mentally incompetent. But the most devastating discovery came when I decided to investigate the story my family had told me about my grandmother's death. Something about their explanation had never felt right, particularly the convenient timing of their claimed inability to contact me about the funeral. What I discovered through public records and a private investigator would change everything I thought I knew about my family's capacity for deception and cruelty. My grandmother Dorothy was not dead. She was alive and well, living in a retirement community 2 hours away, and she had been asking about me for years. Linda and Robert had fabricated the entire story of her death to cut off communication between us, apparently because Dorothy had been expressing interest in my business activities and asking questions about my success. When I finally located her and arranged a secret meeting, the truth about my family's deception became even more shocking. Dorothy revealed that Robert was not actually her biological son, a fact that had been hidden from the family for over 50 years. She had married my grandfather when Robert was 3 years old and had raised him as her own, but his biological father was a man she had never married. More importantly, Dorothy had been leaving her substantial estate, worth approximately $50 million, to her biological grandchildren, which meant that Madison was her only legitimate heir since Robert had no biological claim to her inheritance. "I've been trying to reach you for years because I wanted to discuss my will and make sure you understood your inheritance," Dorothy explained during our emotional reunion. "Your parents kept telling me you were too busy or that you had moved and they didn't have your current contact information. I started to suspect something was wrong when they claimed you had died in a car accident last year, but then I saw someone who looked just like you at the grocery store a few months ago." The revelation that Linda and Robert had told Dorothy I was dead was almost too much to process. They had been so committed to keeping us apart that they were willing to let an elderly woman grieve for her supposedly deceased granddaughter rather than allow us to maintain a relationship. The cruelty and calculation required for this level of deception revealed a side of my parents that I had never fully understood, despite years of experiencing their rejection and hostility. Dorothy also revealed that she had been the anonymous benefactor who had provided some of the early funding for my startup, though she hadn't realized it at the time. Robert had approached her years ago asking for a loan to help his struggling daughter with her business expenses, and she had happily provided $50,000. Of course, that money had never reached me, and Robert had apparently used it for his own purposes while continuing to tell Dorothy that her granddaughter was ungrateful and had never properly thanked her for the assistance. The conspiracy went even deeper when Dorothy told me that Linda had been forging her signature on various legal documents over the years, gradually gaining power of attorney and control over her financial affairs. Linda had been positioning herself to inherit Dorothy's estate by claiming that I was either dead, mentally incompetent, or criminally involved in activities that would disqualify me from inheritance. The $50 million inheritance that should have been mine was being systematically stolen through legal fraud and identity theft. Working with Dorothy and my legal team, I began gathering evidence of Linda's elder abuse and financial fraud, but the investigation was interrupted by a devastating cyberattack against Technova Solutions. Hackers had gained access to our servers and financial systems, stealing over $10 million in cryptocurrency and sensitive client data. The attack was sophisticated and targeted, suggesting inside knowledge of our security protocols and financial structures. The timing of the cyberattack, coming just as I was preparing to expose my family's crimes, was too convenient to be coincidental. My cybersecurity team traced the attack to a group of hackers who had been hired through intermediaries, making it impossible to identify who had commissioned the attack. But the hackers had focused specifically on information that would be valuable to someone trying to discredit me or damage my business relationships, rather than simply stealing money for personal gain. Trevor's involvement became apparent when our investigation revealed that he had connections to individuals with criminal records related to cybercrime and identity theft. His new business partners included people who had been convicted of computer fraud and financial crimes, suggesting that his company was not the legitimate consulting firm he claimed it to be. The realization that my own brother might have arranged for my company to be attacked by cybercriminals was almost impossible to accept, even given everything else he had done to sabotage my success. During this crisis period, I found myself questioning whether continuing to fight my family was worth the psychological and financial cost. The constant attacks, legal battles, and security threats were taking a toll on my health and my ability to focus on growing my business. Some nights I would sit in my office, looking at the city lights and wondering whether I should just liquidate everything, move to another country, and start over somewhere my family couldn't find me. 1 month ago, I made the decision that would define the end of my relationship with my family forever. Instead of continuing to react defensively to their attacks, I would go on the offensive and force a final confrontation that would either result in reconciliation or complete separation. The plan I developed with Alexander and Sarah would require me to return home for Thanksgiving dinner, but this time I would be prepared for whatever my family might try to do to me. The first step was gathering irrefutable evidence of every crime and ethical violation my family members had committed against me over the years. Sarah's legal team worked with financial forensics experts and private investigators to document Linda's elder abuse and fraud against Dorothy, Trevor's tax evasion and embezzlement from his employer, and Natasha's identity theft and credit fraud. We also prepared comprehensive evidence of their coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation through fake social media accounts and false reports to regulatory agencies. More importantly, I had been working with the FBI's white-collar crime division to investigate the cybercrime attack against my company. The federal agents were particularly interested in Trevor's connections to known cybercriminals and the possibility that the attack was commissioned by someone with personal motivations rather than financial ones. While I couldn't control the timing of any arrests or indictments, I wanted my family to understand that their actions had crossed the line from personal vendetta into serious federal crimes. But the most shocking revelation came when our investigation into Laura's role in the conspiracy revealed that she was not actually working independently to help Trevor. Laura was an undercover private investigator who had been hired by Robert to monitor my activities and gather information about my business operations. She had been posing as a friendly family member for over 3 years while systematically violating my privacy and feeding information to people who were actively trying to harm me. "Your father has been paying me $500 per month to maintain contact with you and report on your activities," Laura admitted when Sarah's investigators confronted her with evidence of the payments. "He told me you were involved in something illegal and that the family needed to gather evidence to protect themselves from being associated with your crimes. I thought I was helping prevent the family from getting into trouble with law enforcement." The discovery that Laura had been a paid spy explained how Trevor had obtained so much detailed information about my business operations and personal life. Every conversation I had shared with her, every detail about my struggles and successes, every moment of vulnerability when I had trusted her with my feelings about family rejection had been reported back to Robert and used against me in their campaign of harassment and sabotage. Preparing for the Thanksgiving confrontation required careful coordination with my security team and legal advisors. I would be wearing hidden recording devices to document whatever threats or admissions my family might make during dinner. Alexander and Sarah would be positioned nearby with legal documents, including restraining orders and criminal complaints that could be filed immediately if necessary. My cybersecurity team would be monitoring all electronic communications to detect any attempts to hack my devices or steal information during the visit. The psychological preparation was perhaps more challenging than the legal and technical aspects. I had to mentally prepare myself for the possibility that this dinner would be the last time I ever spoke to my parents or siblings. Despite everything they had done to hurt me, the prospect of complete separation from my biological family was emotionally devastating in ways I hadn't anticipated. But I also had to prepare for the possibility that confronting them with evidence of their crimes might lead to genuine remorse and a chance for reconciliation. Part of me still hoped that my family's attacks were based on misunderstanding rather than malicious intent, and that showing them the truth about my success and their misconceptions might lead to healing rather than further conflict. The most important preparation was deciding exactly how much truth I was willing to reveal about my success and how I wanted to handle the power dynamics once my family understood what I had achieved. I had spent years being treated as the family failure, and I would soon be in a position to completely reverse those roles. The temptation to humiliate them the way they had humiliated me was strong, but I wanted to take the high road if possible and focus on establishing healthy boundaries rather than seeking revenge. As Thanksgiving approached, I found myself experiencing a mixture of anticipation and dread that made it difficult to sleep or concentrate on work. This dinner would either mark the beginning of a healthier relationship with my family or the definitive end of those relationships forever. Either way, I was determined that I would never again allow myself to be treated as a failure or burdened by people who should have been celebrating my achievements. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that normally filled me with nostalgia for childhood holidays, but this year I felt only determination and nervous energy as I drove toward my parents' house. I had dressed carefully in old jeans and a sweater that I had worn during my startup days, deliberately choosing clothes that would reinforce their impression of me as struggling and unsuccessful. The contrast between my appearance and the reality of my financial situation felt like a costume I was wearing for the final performance of a very long play. Walking through their front door carrying a simple pumpkin pie, I felt the familiar weight of their expectations and judgments settling over me like a heavy blanket. Linda greeted me with the same forced smile she had been using for years, the expression of someone tolerating an unwelcome guest out of obligation rather than affection. Robert barely acknowledged my presence, focusing intently on the football game as if my arrival was not worth interrupting his entertainment. The first few hours of the evening followed the predictable pattern I had experienced for years. Trevor and Natasha made their usual jokes about my unemployment and social isolation, while Linda made pointed comments about the importance of having a steady income and contributing to society. I played my part perfectly, appearing dejected and defensive whenever they questioned me about my job search or living situation. Every cutting remark and dismissive gesture was being recorded by the devices hidden in my clothing. During dinner, the attacks intensified as my family seemed to feed off each other's cruelty and my apparent vulnerability. Robert launched into a lecture about personal responsibility and the dangers of living in fantasy instead of facing reality. At some point, Madison, you have to accept that these business dreams aren't going to magically turn into a real career, he proclaimed while cutting his turkey with unnecessary aggression. Normal people your age have mortgages, retirement accounts, and realistic plans for the future. Linda added her own twist to the humiliation by comparing me unfavorably to my siblings and their conventional achievements. Trevor and Natasha understand that success comes from showing up consistently and working hard at real jobs, she announced to the table full of relatives who had been watching this family drama unfold for years. They don't waste time with get-rich-quick schemes or pretending that playing on computers is the same thing as having a career. The moment I had been waiting for came when Robert stood up from the dinner table and delivered the ultimatum that would change everything between us forever. Madison, your mother and I have decided that we can't continue enabling this behavior. You're 28 years old, and you're still acting like a child who refuses to accept reality." He paused dramatically, clearly savoring what he believed was his moment of parental authority. "Either you get a real job within 30 days, or you can go live in the streets with the other people who refuse to take responsibility for their lives." That was my cue. I reached into my purse and activated the signal that would bring Alexander and Sarah to the front door, then smiled at my family with an expression they had never seen before. "You're absolutely right, Dad. It's time to stop pretending and start dealing with reality." I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app that showed my personal account balances, then placed it on the table where everyone could see the numbers clearly. "Let's talk about reality." The room fell silent as my family members leaned forward to read the screen, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief to shock as they processed what they were seeing. 8 figures. Multiple accounts. Investment portfolios. Cryptocurrency holdings. The total value of my liquid assets alone was over $30 million, not including my equity stake in Technova Solutions or my real estate holdings. "This is fake," Trevor said immediately, his voice cracking slightly. "You created fake bank statements on your computer to try to fool us again." But his confidence was wavering as he stared at the official banking interface that would have been nearly impossible to fabricate convincingly. Natasha was frantically taking pictures of the screen with her phone, probably planning to reverse engineer the images to prove they were manipulated. Linda's reaction was perhaps the most satisfying. The woman who had spent years telling neighbors that I was mentally ill and financially irresponsible was staring at evidence that I was worth more money than our entire extended family would earn in their lifetimes. "How?" was all she managed to whisper, her face pale and her hands shaking slightly. I stood up from the dinner table and walked to their laptop computer, quickly accessing the Technova Solutions website and pulling up recent press releases about our latest contracts and partnerships. "This is my company," I announced, pointing to the CEO biography that featured my photograph and real name. "We went public 6 months ago with a valuation of $500 million. My personal stake is worth over $200 million. The proof was overwhelming and undeniable. Financial documents, press coverage, client testimonials, industry awards, speaking engagements, board positions. I had spent 5 years building an empire while they convinced themselves I was a failure, and now the truth was spreading across their dining room table like water through a cracked foundation." Robert's response was pure desperation. He dropped to his knees beside my chair and grabbed my arm with both hands, his previous authority completely evaporated. "Madison, sweetie, we never meant to hurt you. We were just worried because we didn't understand what you were doing." His voice was pleading in a way I had never heard before. "We're so proud of you, and we want to help you celebrate this incredible success." But I wasn't finished. The final revelation would be the one that ended any possibility of reconciliation forever. I pulled out copies of the legal documents Sarah had prepared, including evidence of Linda's fraud against Dorothy, Trevor's tax evasion, and Laura's paid surveillance activities. "While I was building a successful company and becoming a millionaire, you were committing felonies to try to destroy me," I said calmly, spreading the documents across the table. "The FBI is currently investigating the cyber attack against my company, and they're very interested in Trevor's connections to known cybercriminals." The power dynamic in the room had completely reversed. The family members who had spent years treating me like a burden were now staring at evidence that I could destroy their lives with a phone call to law enforcement. The daughter they had tried to have committed for mental health issues was now the most successful person any of them had ever met personally. For my final move, I announced that I would be donating Dorothy's $50 million inheritance to a foundation that supports entrepreneurs whose families don't believe in their potential. Grandmother Dorothy and I have been working together to establish the Second Chance Foundation, I explained. The money that should have been stolen from me will instead help other people whose families have rejected their dreams. The immediate aftermath of that Thanksgiving confrontation was more emotionally complex than I had anticipated. Walking out of my parents' house for what I knew would be the final time, I felt a mixture of satisfaction, relief, and unexpected grief that took months of therapy to fully process. The little girl inside me who had always wanted her family's approval was mourning the definitive end of that possibility, even though the adult woman I had become knew that cutting ties was the healthiest choice I could make. For the first 3 months after Thanksgiving, I maintained complete no contact with my parents and siblings, focusing instead on healing from years of psychological abuse and rebuilding my sense of self-worth. Working with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a trauma counselor who specialized in family rejection and narcissistic abuse, I began to understand that my family's treatment of me was never really about my actual capabilities or achievements. Their need to see me as a failure was about their own insecurities and limited worldview, not about any real deficiency in my character or potential. The therapy process revealed patterns of emotional manipulation and control that had been affecting my relationships and decision-making since childhood. Families like yours often choose one member to be the scapegoat who carries all the blame for the family's problems, Dr. Walsh explained during one of our sessions. Your success threatened their narrative about themselves and their place in the world, so they had to either celebrate your achievements or destroy them. Unfortunately, they chose destruction. During this healing period, I found myself building what therapists call a chosen family with the people who had supported my dreams when my biological family had rejected them. Alexander Chen became like the father I had always wished for, someone who celebrated my victories and offered wisdom during challenging decisions. Sarah Martinez evolved from being just my attorney to being one of my closest friends, someone I could trust completely with both professional and personal challenges. Most importantly, my relationship with Dorothy flourished into the grandmother-granddaughter bond that had been stolen from us for so many years. At 79 years old, Dorothy moved into the guest wing of my penthouse, bringing stories about our family history and unconditional love that I had never experienced from my parents. Your great-grandmother was an entrepreneur too, she told me during one of our evening conversations. She started 3 businesses during the Great Depression and supported 2 families when their husbands lost their jobs. You have her spirit and her determination. The Second Chance Foundation became more than just a way to redirect my inheritance, it became my passion project and a method for transforming my family's rejection into something positive that could help others. We established mentorship programs, business incubators, and emotional support groups for entrepreneurs whose families didn't believe in their potential. Within the first year, we had helped launch over 50 new businesses and provided counseling services to hundreds of people dealing with family rejection related to their career choices. 6 months after our confrontation, Trevor reached out through my attorney requesting a meeting to apologize and attempt reconciliation. Against Sarah's advice, I agreed to meet with him in a neutral location with legal witnesses present. To my surprise, Trevor had been attending therapy sessions to address what he called his jealousy and control issues, and his apology seemed genuine rather than strategic. I spent so many years needing you to fail because your success made me feel worthless, he admitted during our difficult conversation. I realize now that I was trying to hold you back to make myself feel better about my own limited achievements. While I chose to forgive Trevor and allow him back into my life on a limited basis, I maintained strict boundaries about our relationship and made it clear that any future betrayal would result in permanent separation. Linda and Robert, however, showed no genuine remorse for their actions and continued to portray themselves as victims of my supposed deception and ingratitude. Their inability to acknowledge the harm they had caused made reconciliation impossible, and I accepted that they would never be part of my life again. Creating new family traditions became an important part of my healing process. Instead of dreading holidays, I began hosting Thanksgiving dinners for my employees, their families, and other people who had found themselves without biological families during the holiday season. These celebrations were filled with genuine gratitude, mutual respect, and the kind of unconditional support that I had always craved from my birth family but never received. The most profound lesson from this entire experience was understanding that family is not just about shared DNA, but about shared values, mutual respect, and unconditional support. The people who celebrated my success, supported my dreams, and stood by me during difficult times were my real family, regardless of their legal or biological relationship to me. This realization freed me from the obligation to maintain relationships with people who consistently chose to hurt rather than help me. Today, 3 years after that final Thanksgiving dinner, my life is fuller and more peaceful than it has ever been. Technova Solutions continues to grow and innovate, recently expanding into international markets and developing new artificial intelligence applications that are revolutionizing industries around the world. More importantly, I'm surrounded by people who value my contributions and celebrate my achievements rather than undermining them. The financial success that my family tried so hard to deny and destroy has allowed me to create positive change in the world through both my business activities and my philanthropic work. But the emotional healing that came from learning to value myself independently of their approval has been far more valuable than any amount of money I could ever earn. Sometimes I wonder how many other successful people are hiding their achievements from families who never believed in their potential, or how many entrepreneurs are struggling with family rejection while building amazing companies and creating value for the world. If you're one of those people, I want you to know that your worth isn't determined by your family's ability to recognize it, and your success doesn't require their approval to be valid and meaningful. The journey from garage startup to multi-million-dollar company was difficult, but the journey from family scapegoat to confident, independent adult was even harder. Both journeys taught me that the only person's opinion of your potential that truly matters is your own, and that sometimes the greatest gift your family can give you is showing you exactly what kind of person you don't want to become. Your biological family may not choose to celebrate your success, but that doesn't diminish your achievements or your worth as a human being. Build your own family from people who see your value. Create your own traditions based on mutual respect and genuine love, and never let anyone convince you that their limitations should become your boundaries. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between family acceptance and pursuing your dreams? Have you found success despite family members who didn't believe in your potential? Share your story in the comments below because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content about overcoming family challenges and building success on your own terms. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that family rejection doesn't define your worth or limit your potential. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your dreams are valid regardless of who believes in them. Here's to building the life and family you truly deserve, filled with people who celebrate your success instead of trying to tear you down.